All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. As I had mentioned before, I am Sal Munoz, the System Implementation Manager with All Chicago. And today we are going to be talking about Service Transactions 101. We're going to be doing a deep dive into service transactions today. Hopefully, you'll be able to glean some information that you never really may have understood before or never really were able to explore in depth before. So a couple of housekeeping things. I have a handout, a PDF of all the slides in the handout section of the GoToWebinar navigation bar, so you can find it there. And on that are several links that will be linking to this video once I eventually upload it into the HMIS help desk. We have a relatively small set of folks joining us today, but I'm going to concentrate on mostly addressing the functions of ServicePoint, the functions of service transactions. So for the most part, I'm going to save all your questions for the end. So I will not be reading your questions until we get pretty in-depth into the end, but I encourage you to send in your questions as they come along. I know some of them will probably be answered as we continue forward. And then at the end, when we get to the question sections, I will unmute people if we have enough time. We don't have that big of a cohort this time around to not be able to talk. So hopefully we'll be able to take some time to talk through things. And let's go ahead and see what we have on the docket for today. So right off the bat, I want to talk a little bit about what service transactions are. Excuse me real quick. What service transactions are and why they are used. And I'm actually going to touch on the Ayers taxonomy. That's a concept that I think many people may have seen the word of the phrase Ayers taxonomy tossed around, but may not know the origin. And we'll give you a little bit of insight in terms of how services and HMIS are generated. Then we are going to touch on services assigned to projects, how you will be able to review your project services, and what we have created for you to be able to adjust the services that are provided by your project. Then we are going to jump into something that I think a few people may be using, but not necessarily everyone, and that's SkanPoint, where you are able to document services en masse, and they operate off of client lists that you create or your unit lists. So it's a really helpful tool, and we'll get into sort of previewing what it looks like. And then I'm going to talk about some of the canned reports in ServicePoint that you're able to run to see how many services you've provided. And we will be opening up for questions at the very end of today. And before we hop into everything, I want to make one thing clear. We are talking about service transactions, and that means in relation to the types of services that you provide to your clients. So this is going to be stuff like you're providing case management services, you're providing SSI appeals services, things of that nature. What we are not talking about today is going to be anything related to coordinated entry. So ServicePoint has these systems that sometimes we build off of, and coordinated entry is really built off of the service and referral system in HMIS, but this training is not about that. This training is going to be dedicated towards helping you be able to determine how to best document the types of services that you provide to clients. This is not going to be talking about referrals, nothing of that sort. We are not going to be touching that at all. With that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into it. So what are service transactions and why are they used? Service transactions are a way for you to be able to track the services that you've provided to clients. And so these services operate on a transactional basis. And I realize how kind of funny that sentence is. Every service documented fills an identified need of that client. So we're going to get into it, but essentially the service transaction system in HMIS always operates by identifying a need of the client and then filling in the service that was provided for that client. So this is really what we are going to be taking a look at today. And one thing to note is that not every agency uses service transactions in HMIS in the same way. Some agencies use service transactions to document every single interaction they have with a client. They document every meal they give to the client. They document clothes that they give to the client. They use service transactions for every single bit of that. But there are other agencies that never touch service transactions at all. And then, of course, there are other agencies that are mandated to use service transactions per their workflow. One such project that I'm thinking of is actually outreach projects. Outreach projects are, we ask outreach projects to actually indicate that they last encountered a client by entering a service transaction for that client. So that's just a couple of the things that we want to be thinking about. Again, this is not mandated for every project type, but it really does depend on your agency, on your funder, whether or not you fully use service transactions for your project and for your agency. Again, some agencies go their entire sort of lifespan without ever touching service transactions, and other agencies, it's their bread and butter. So you may be wondering where the services that are listed in HMIS comes from, and that all comes from the Alliance of Information and Referral System Taxonomy. And so you may have seen the AIRS taxonomy tossed around. What it really is, it is a way for the entire nation to standardize the types of services provided. So whereas before certain folks may have called, getting a SNAP appeal, they may have called it food stamps appeal, or they may have called it appealing for food stamps, something of that sort. It's not necessarily standardized. So this agency, the AIRS taxonomy, what it really is doing is allowing the entirety of the nation to have a standardized dictionary to be able to essentially say to be able to really have a set standard across the nation, so that we can compare the services provided in one state to another, if that's ever necessary. But also, if you're going from the Chicago COC and you're in the Michigan COC, ideally the same services have the same meaning, have the same intention. So that's where the AIRS taxonomy comes in. It standardizes everything across all of the United States, and it's essential for some of our information and resource databases. So I have a link to the AIRS organization. You can go ahead and take a look at what exactly the history of the taxonomy is, but I wanted to give you a little bit of insight into where this catalog of services is coming from, because some people just think that it's something that Chicago sets. No, it's a national standard that we have adopted, on part because we are also part of ServicePoint, and that's what the ServicePoint system has adopted as well. So in order to access the service transaction side of things, there are two places from the very beginning of a client's page. You can either click the Service Transaction tab, or just straight out go ahead and add a service right at the services section of the client summary page. And we will be doing sort of a live demonstration of this in just a few minutes, but I want to show you these screenshots so that you have a sense of what to anticipate. So once we click on the Service Transactions tab, you may have seen this where it shows you these set of boxes. So you can immediately add a need, add a service, add multiple services, add a referral, do an eligibility search, or view entire service stay, the entire service history. But what some of you may have seen when you go to service transaction the first time, maybe you forget something about the client information, so you click back into the client information tab. Then when you go back to service transactions, it may look like this. So it switches over to tab view, and that's fine. It's essentially the same thing that this screen is the same as this screen. I know it's a little confusing, but we'll show you in a live demonstration shortly that both of these screens sort of have the same intention. They have the same data. It's just structured in a different way. And this screen shows up after you add a service, or you click View Entire Service History, or if you switch to Client Information tab back to Service Transaction tab, this is the screen that will greet you. It will not be this screen. So again, this screen is sort of your first time getting into a client's record and clicking on Service Transaction, and this is the screen after you've been in that client's record for some time. But again, the difference between these, it's just a matter of aesthetics. They have the exact same function. So once you do add a service, let's say you go back and you click on Add Service, this is going to be the screen that you're greeted with, and these prompts are really essential in terms of determining what kind of services your project provides. So the service provider is obviously the project that's providing the service. You're never going to have an agency level, well, I don't want to say never, but for the most part, you're not going to have an agency level service. You're going to have services provided by projects, and I'll get into why a little later. Then for the start date, this start date can be backdated to reflect the date of service, and the end date can be there. If you paid a month's rent or something of that sort, then you could sort of demonstrate that the end date is 30 days. It really depends by the type of funding source and reporting requirements that you have. There's nothing standardized in terms of the end date. But typically, you'll keep the end date as the same date as the start date if it's something like case management or anything of that sort. And then we have service type. So this shows the services that are linked to that project. If you do not see a service provided, you can click on the lookup button, and it allows the user to find a service in the taxonomy. So in that AIRS taxonomy, it'll pop up a record sheet that allows you to select the different types of services for the client. So let's go ahead and take a look what that looks like if you were to click on lookup. So this is the screen if you were to click on lookup on the very first prompt. So you should understand that the taxonomy works in hierarchy. So as you can see here, the search results, it shows you basic needs, consumer services, criminal justice, and legal services. So if you were to click on basic needs, it would sort of lead you down a tree. So the basic needs may be food, shelter, clothing, things of that nature, and then clicking on each of those leads you to more specific needs as it comes up. Now, the way you're probably going to be using the system isn't by clicking on healthcare and then seeing, going down the list to see what you can find. For the most part, you're going to be searching by terminology, and phrasing is pretty important if you're trying to find something in the services provided. So the hope is that you're never really going to have to even look up your services. You just tell us what kind of services your project provides, and we will preset the services for you so that it's just on your dropdown. But in those instances where you may be providing a service that your project never typically provides, this will be important. And just understand that phrasing is very important. You have to sort of think about how to phrase things, the terminology, interchangeable terminology also sort of comes into play because food stamps, maybe SNAP, things of that nature. So it's really a matter of sort of thinking through just what the function of the service that you're providing is, and thinking of the different verbiage that may be attached to that. Because again, the taxonomy has over 9,000 items on here, and it really is in depth. And if you ever have a question that, if you ever see a service in there that looks like it could be right for you, but you're not exactly sure if it's this, if it's the kind of service you're thinking about, you can always click on view, which is right next to the code. So when you click on view, this details page, or I'm sorry, this details section on the lower bottom right corner will fill in and give you the definition of how that of just what that service is. So all of these services have a definition. Again, the AIRS taxonomy is huge. There's a definition for every single one of those services provided. So again, if you are searching and then you find something that seems about right, go ahead and click view, and you'll be able to see if that service code is just what you need. So outside of that little diversion, let's go back to how we document service transactions in HMIS. So what you can find here is essentially that the service there are three major portions to the service transactions. This is a long sheet and it looks intimidating and it looks like there's a lot to answer, but truly it really isn't. All you need to, for the most part, answer for the very basic stuff. I'm saying if you just provided your client case management for the week, you literally just have to indicate to us what the service provider is, what the start date is, the end date. The service type should be case care management. You can skip number 2 because there's no funds applied there, and then just update the need status to be either completed and met or completed and unmet. That's it. All you have to worry about are the things that are in bold and that have an asterisk next to it. That's the baseline stuff that you need in order to track the services provided by your agency. Now, sometimes for certain projects, and particularly those projects that are pulling from a fund, and I'm specifically referring to state homeless prevention projects and diversion projects, you will need to click on Add Funds for Service. So I know the service cost section is there and looks like that's where you would document funds. In fact, no, it's not service costs. You're going to document any funds that you're pulling through the section number 2 here, which is apply funds for service. And that will spend down any of the potential funds that you have attached to that certain project. But again, this is only for state homeless prevention, diversion projects, and those projects that we ask to attach a dollar amount to their service transactions. The rest of the providers, the rest of you all, do not necessarily have to do that. And in fact, if you were just giving your clients a bus card, the service cost portion would be just fine because you're not spending down any of the funds that we have preset, but rather you're just documenting that you spent $20 on a bus card for a client or something of the sort. And then indicating the need status in section number 3 is critical. It allows us to know whether a service was met, whether that client's need was met, things of that nature. So the need status is really there to answer, does this client's needs, were they met, were they unmet, and does this client need further follow-up? So what you're going to use for the need status is anything that does not have prefixes like CES or FHP in front of it. The service transactions only section is also fine. You can go ahead and use that, but anything that has CES or FHP, don't necessarily touch because that's more so for referrals. That's more so for the Catholic Charities matching team to send you a need status, and then you reply to that referral. I'm sorry. The Catholic Charities would send you a referral, and then you reply to that referral by updating the need status to reflect whether you need a rematch or anything of that sort. That's the use of it for coordinated entry, but in our use, in terms of the needs of the service transaction world, you're not going to select anything that has CES or FHP in front of it. That's only reserved for referrals. So let's talk a little bit about services assigned to your project. each individual project has its own defined set of services attached with it. So what you'll see once we get into the live site, the training site, is that there are going to be several services attached to different projects. So the services linked to, All Chicago Outreach Project are going to differ from the services provided by the All Chicago Homelessness Prevention Project. Why? Well, the Outreach Project is going to have, in services that are tailored towards outreach. So it's going to be documenting street outreach programs, maybe that potentially that a medical service was provided or a checkup was provided for some of those projects that have those components. But that's different from a homeless prevention project, right? Outreach project isn't going to necessarily provide a service of providing that client with rental deposit, but a homelessness prevention project will. So just by your projects, even if they're at the same agency, they're not funded to provide the same set of services. A set of services at a homelessness prevention project are likely going to be rental deposit assistance, rent payment assistance, utility assistance, things of that nature, whereas an outreach project will more so center on case care management and just documenting on the care of the person rather than the deposit or any financial support provided to them. So you may be wondering, how can you see the types of services that your projects have, and so that you can then determine whether or not it's correct. It's simple enough by just going to a client's record and clicking a drop down, and that's it. So I'll show you how to do that in the live training site. So let's hop out of here and get into the training site itself. So I'm already here. Let me make the screen a little bigger. All right, so I have a client in mind already. We have Mr. Bob Hoskins, and again, this is a fake website, fake clients. This is a training site, staging site. None of this data is real. So what I'll do is click on Service Transactions, and I'm going to show you what it looks like if you click back into Client Information. See, nothing appears until you actually click on one of these. So I like to usually click on View Entire Service History because I prefer the tab view. The reason that it shows you those bubbles, those icons, is because it's just assuming you're going to Service Transactions so that you can directly add a service. Just click on that Add Service button. But I like to have tabs just so that it sort of continues on this aesthetic of the client information. So I'm at my Services tab, and what I will do is actually click on Add Service. And so I want to sort of explore what each of these services look like. So here I have my agency, All Chicago, and let's take a look at the services provided by All Chicago. And you can see that a lot of them are case care management, credit rating assistance, housing search assistance, legal services, etc. Let's see how that changes when I switch it over to Outreach Project. Notice there are only two services here, so outreach programs and street outreach programs, which is perfect because that is what is required for outreach projects. They have to indicate that they did a street outreach program service and they were able to locate a client. That's necessary for them. Now let's see what the emergency shelter has. And here we go. So the emergency shelter has at-risk housing related assistance programs, case care management, housing search assistance, etc. And then finally, I want to show you the rapid rehousing services, which I believe will probably be relatively the same. So here you could see moving expenses, moving services, etc., credit rating, credit counseling, etc. So things that are a bit more related to helping that client get permanent housing rather than the outreach projects, which were whose services were more attuned towards being an outreach program. So I will go ahead, I'm going to move forward with actually documenting an outreach project, and the service type is going to be street outreach programs. And I'm leaving the start date and end date as the same there because this is just essentially going to be me saying that I viewed the client, I talked with them, and I'm documenting the service to indicate that I was able to make contact. So I'll click on Save and Continue. And oh, I'm sorry. So actually, one of the nice things is that you can check. Let's go back. You can check your various services provided for each project, and you don't have to click on Save and Continue. You just click Cancel, and that's how you're able to check the services provided by your projects. So I would encourage everyone to actually do that on the training site and just sort of look at each of your projects, look at the services attached to it, and let us know if there's any updates that you want. So let me go back to adding a service. And I'll say again that it is from our outreach project. Service type is a street outreach program. I'll set the end date as today. And I want to make a quick point about provider-specific service. If you can add provider-specific services, this can be, one way I've seen it done is that there are, you were providing translation for food stamps. So if there's a let's say you have a case where you provided food stamps application assistance, and then under provider-specific service, you could also say, and this was translated into Spanish for the client. So something of that sort. The provider-specific service isn't a replacement for the services provided, right? For the service type, but rather it's sort of there to add on to how did your agency sort of tweak this to reflect the strengths of your agency. So again, if you work at a bilingual agency that works with several clients that who have English as a second language, you could definitely have that, you assisted them with SSI applications, but you translated the entire thing for them. So just keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and move forward. So once more, if you want to edit it, you can click on the pencil, and there we go. The service provider is right there. The service type is right there. You can change it as need be. For the most part, you're always going to leave service location, service staff, service notes empty. You don't necessarily need to have any of that. All of this right here is not necessary. The service costs you can answer that, but for those agencies that like State HP and any agencies that have to document funding, you're going to be using this Apply Funds for Service section right down here. Service costs is really there as a reminder for yourself, for your agency, but it usually does not factor into any of the reporting that we have. But if you do have a fund to spend down from, you're going to be using the Supply Funds for Service section. So you can see that you can add a funding source here. So if I were in diversion, that's where I would select the funding source of diversion, etc., and then indicate an amount here that eventually gets submitted and should be approved by the agency. And if you, again, this is totally optional. You can also add support documentation if you want to keep something related to the service, right? Like if it was a service of helping them get their birth certificate, you can add the efforts and the paperwork you had to set up under the support documentation section, if you would like to. Follow-up, not necessary. You don't need to answer the follow-ups. It's only really this function is only really there to be used by those projects that use case management pretty frequently. And then, of course, we get down to the need information. So again, notice here, everything is almost CES. Right at the very bottom, we have identified in progress. For my outreach projects, we have successful outreach engagement, unsuccessful outreach engagement, and then service transactions only, closed and met, closed and unmet. For the vast majority of folks that aren't related to the world of CES or FHP, you're going to be using identified in progress, service transactions only, closed and met, service transactions only, closed and unmet. Those are going to be the four. But for my instance, I'm saying that I'm an outreach project, so I'll go ahead and click on successful outreach engagement. The outcome of the need can be met, but really, again, the most important thing here is the need status. You could even leave the outcome of need alone. What we're looking at primarily is the need status. I'm going to go ahead and click save. Click save and exit, actually, and our service is documented right here. But I want to go to view entire service history. So let's check. And what you'll notice is that for this project, for this service that we just provided, there are 2 records. And I know that may be a little confusing at first, but you should understand that the service transaction system operates by identifying a need of the client for you. So the system is essentially saying, this client needed to have a street outreach program reach out to them because you were providing that service. Just like if you fed someone, that person had a need of eating. So you may not be thinking because you're providing that service to them, but they needed to eat, right? So that's how you can think of it. You don't necessarily have to worry about thinking too hard about the client need system, right? You just go ahead and add the services as it arises. But know that anytime you add a service, you are also on the back end creating a need, but there's not much. You don't have to overthink it too much. It's simply there as a way for us to be able to, as a way for the system to be able to make sense of, like, well, this person had a need of clothing, which is why you provided that. Which is why you provided that service of providing them clothing. So I hope that makes sense. But just know that the need, you don't have to pay too much attention to. Really, what you're doing is just adding a service. So let's go back. Here we are. So we are going to talk a little bit about changing your project services. So after you have fully reviewed your HMIS form, everything of that sort, after you've reviewed the various projects and the services attached to those projects, you can go ahead and, if there's something off, let us know and we can change the services for you. I think that a lot of projects haven't necessarily thought about this aspect or didn't know that this aspect even really existed. So if you notice that your project that's providing a lot of, that provides a service of giving food or clothing to your clients, and you want to start tracking that, but you don't see that service in the dropdown, then let us know and we will add it to that project. So you can use this form to indicate to us what services your specific project has, and we'll do our best to sort of find it in the AIRS taxonomy. Now, this is a bit of a service point 102, if I'm being frank. I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about SkanPoint, which is a system that I think some agencies get very comfortable with and other agencies never know it even exists. So let's really quickly hop into it. There are instances where you're going to need to document a service across multiple clients in your project. And the best tool for this is SkanPoint. And so if you were to look for SkanPoint, SkanPoint would be just above the reports section in your navigation menu, that gray sidebar on the left-hand side of ServicePoint. Now, not every person has access to ServicePoint. It's very easy for us to give you access. It's simply a check that we can provide you. So I'm sorry, we just had to check something off and then it'll be generated for you. So again, if you don't see SkanPoint in your sidebar, let us know. We can get it added to your profile, to your record, so that you actually have access to that system. And if you don't see it and you want to begin to explore SkanPoint, email us at HMIS@allchicago and we can get that set up for you. So SkanPoint has various tabs. The main one we're going to be talking about is Provide Service, where it's one service across multiple clients. And then I will touch a little bit on multiple services, but multiple services is really if you provided a client with both clothing, a healthcare checkup, and employment services in the same day, you can have all three of those apply to that single client in one fell swoop instead of having to go through the process of creating 3 different service transactions. If we have time, I'll be addressing this one, but for the most part, I'm not going to touch this right now. So then we have add shelter stay, and that's not necessary. That's really not necessary since ShelterPoint already does this function for you. So again, add shelter stay already operates through ShelterPoint, and there's really no need for you to have to use SkanPoint to add a shelter stay for your client. And then I will touch a lot on manage client lists. So this allows you to generate a list of clients that may have current entries in your project or that interact frequently with your project. So it takes a little bit to set up the client list and to maintain the client list, but you'll see that it actually makes this process of providing multiple services to several clients, and it may be the same type of service, it makes it a lot easier. So I'll be talking mostly about the Provide Service tab and the Manage Client List tab. And then again, the final tab that's on here is Generate ID Cards. This is more so for those agencies that have a scanner station that they use to check clients in and out. So you can generate ID cards for multiple clients instead of having to go to their individual record, go to client profile, then generate ID card. In this instance, you can sort of create them in bulk. Let's check it out. All right, so back at my client record. And so SkanPoint, as you can see, is right here, right above the reports section. I'll click on SkanPoint. And once more, we have all of our tabs, and I want to sort of do a quick review of each of them. So we have Provide Service, and as you can see, it's very similar to that of the service transaction page, right? So we have our services right up here, and this stuff that we can, for the most part, not have to fill in, and then applying funds for service for those agencies that is applicable to, and then we would click on Start Scan. But let's not jump to that so quickly. And then here we have multiple services, and the number of services will almost always be just one. You can ignore the fact that it's asking you for the number of services. I think what the function of this really is like if you provide your client with 2 bus cards, because maybe it's a household of 2, then you can just indicate right here number of services is 2 because you gave them 2 bus cards. And again, it looks very similar to what we already have. We have your start date. We have the service provider right up here. And then the type of service is right down here that you can select. So let's say for this outreach project, I'm doing a street outreach program. I'm sorry, actually, let's go with emergency shelter. Case care management. And then if I also wanted to add another, I'd click on add another. So here is my case care management service. The need status would be closed and met. And then notice here's the start of my new service. I may say that it's housing search assistance. And the need status for that would also be closed and met. So here, if I were to, when I eventually click on Start Scan, then I will be able to add those multiple services to whatever number of clients I have. So that's just a little bit of how you can create multiple services and document multiple services in one fell swoop. I'm going to skip the Add Shelter Stay because, again, ShelterPoint does that for us. In the Manage Client List, you can already see that I have a test client list. When I click on the Edit button, it shows me all my clients. I can scan them in by their, let's see if we have someone. Scan them in by just typing in their HMIS number, and there we go. So I have this client. I'll click Add New Client to List, and Joe is actually going to be on this second page. So there you go. So that's how you would add a client. Obviously, if you want to remove a client, you just click on this red button that will remove them from this client list. Click on Exit there. If you want to create, you can have multiple lists. So new test list. And this will be attached to the, let's see, outreach project. And so again, we can add our clients or we can search for them. And so notice when I click search and I added them, I don't know what happened, but you can go ahead and click on Exit, and there Robert Lasky is. So the search function doesn't do a good job of telling you what just happened, but just click on Exit and you'll see that your client was actually added. So I'll click on Exit here. There we go. So we have our two client lists, right? So now I'm going to go ahead and show you the Generate ID cards. And what you'll see here is actually, if I click on this, I can check off the clients I want to generate an ID card for. Click on Print ID Cards. So some of you may have never generated an ID card, but certain agencies do use it to scan clients in and out, and this is what gets generated. So if you use photos, if this is something that would be helpful to you, then by all means, please go ahead and use it. Otherwise, it has a very limited scope of use for certain projects. But let's go back to provide service. So I've already set up my client list. This is how, I've pared my client list down. I created several different client lists, and they're each attached to different providers. Or different projects, I should say. So now I'm going to go to Provide Service. And I want to show you how to provide a service for an emergency shelter. So I'll click Emergency Shelter, and I'll say that we provided them with housing search assistance. Click Submit. Again, we don't have to necessarily concern ourselves with the end date or provider-specific service, any of that, nor the service cost. Again, this depends on your workflow. This depends on the intentions of what you ultimately want out of it, but you don't necessarily need to do that. And this isn't a project that is spending down from a funding source, so I don't have to worry about this. So right down here, you can actually click on Start Scan. And at that point, you just literally search for a client, or you can, so this is where you would scan a client's barcode that generate ID cards. You would scan that with a scanner, and it would populate that client's ID on there, or you could just type it in. And there we go. So this Bob Hoskins was added here. So I'll click on New Session, and that refreshes everything. So Bob Hoskins now has a scan and a service that indicates that he received a service of housing search assistance. So again, if you click on Start Scan, you could literally just type in their numbers and press enter, and as soon as you press enter, a service is created for that client. Or another way, if you want to be a bit more methodical about it and actually review your clients and make sure that you're not entering their information in wrong, you can click on Choose Clients from Client List. And what I'll say, I'll use the one I created yesterday. And you can check off each of the clients that you actually have on your roster. So this is going to be something that's helpful for drop-in projects, that's helpful for those projects that have maybe a running sign-in sheet of folks that come in during the day, and you could just literally go down that sheet and check off their names as they occur. So I'll say that I'm providing this service to Andrews Crystal, Johnny Appleseed, Bob Hoskins, and James Schultz. Then I'll click on Enter Service for our clients. And those services were now successfully entered. And another option that you actually have, you can go ahead and actually select from your unit list too. So for emergency shelters that may have a unit list preset, you don't have to create a new client list because you effectively already have a client list. So you can choose clients from unit list. You'll be selecting the appropriate provider, so that's the emergency shelter. And then we want to view the information for the emergency shelter unit list. Click on Submit. And these are the 4 clients that are enrolled in my emergency shelter. That are enrolled in my emergency shelter and are on my ShelterPoint unit list. So we'll click on Enter Service for Clients, and it entered them. So again, when I'm referring to the unit list, this is literally what I'm referring to. I'm going to show you. And this may seem familiar to some folks, particularly those that work in interim housing or transitional housing or emergency shelter. So these are my 4 clients that were checked in, and I could keep adding clients to this unit list as my beds fill up, and SkanPoint will know, well, they have sort of a client list from their unit list, so let's go ahead and we can pull those clients so that they can easily say that they provided a certain service to all of these clients there. So this could be helpful. The use case for this, I really think, is if you run an emergency shelter and a doctor comes to provide some pro bono checkups on your clients, then in that case, you could sort of say that, you have an emergency shelter. In this instance, I'm not finding the service, so I'll say medical check. Health check. And it does take a little bit to really get to know which one is appropriate. Let's just say this. So let's say a doctor came through and provided several immunizations for pro bono. You could go to your unit list because those clients are already checked in there. Click on Submit, and then run it for those clients that had agreed to that. There you go. So that's a little bit of SkanPoint. We have a pretty hefty article that's coming on the way that sort of serves as a full-out guide for this. It's not quite done yet, but we hope to eventually email it out. But let's go back to our presentation. So if you're interested in sort of integrating this into your workflow, what I'd recommend is that you get in touch with the HMIS team and we can talk through it with you in terms of how you can integrate it successfully. So let's talk a little bit about reporting, and I may not be able to really jump into this too much, but reporting can be found in the reports section, and the report you would want to run is a canned report called service transaction. Anyone can run this report. You don't have to be an ATA. You don't have to have an ART license. You simply need to have an active HMIS license. That's it. And then for reporting, this is the prompt that you will see. I'm going to do a quick run of this so that you get a sense of just what exactly the prompts are doing. So let's go back into ServicePoint. Again, reports is right up here. We'll scroll down to service transactions. My provider, I'll say that I want it to be emergency shelter. And then what you can do, if you want to see the services that your agency as a whole has provided, you would click on your agency name. So for me, I'd say, all right, I'm going to run it on all Chicago, and I'm going to select this provider and its subordinates. And then the system is going to look through every single one of my projects and aggregate all those services here. But for my instance, I'm going to say I just want to see what the emergency shelter has done, and I'll keep it to this selected provider only. So under here, you don't, just to give you a sense, the needs entered by my provider, you don't necessarily have to worry about that again. Really, the one that is going to be most pertinent to you all is going to be checking off services provided by provider. Shelter stays provided by my provider if you want to get a sense of how many shelter stays clients have had at your agency. And then the needs and referrals made by your provider are not necessary. So for the most part, you're not going to be addressing these. You're mostly going to be checking off either services provided by my provider, non-shelter stays, or shelter stays provided by my provider. For me, I'm interested in seeing the types of services that were provided by my emergency shelter that aren't related to a shelter stay. So you can also choose to run this on a specific service code. I'm going to leave it relatively open though. So here I'm just indicating my time frame. You can leave need outcome alone, no need to answer anything there. We'll click on build report. And there you go. So it shows me all of these services that have been provided and linked to my emergency shelter. All right, so we have a service. You let us know which services your project provides. It's a quick form to fill out. Now, one thing that you should all know is that this link right here hosts a lot of basic functions. It has a lot of the basic functions on data entry, running reports. It's a really good starting off point for any new users, any new case managers that you may have at your agency. It sort of goes over the essentials, and once we finish recording this webinar, I will actually be posting all of this webinar to the HMIS Service Point data entry section right here. And I also have that linked right here. And we also already have some service transaction training snippets. So there's already a video that's much shorter than this one. It's not as in-depth, but it goes over service transactions in a quick way for those that are already familiar with ServicePoint. So unfortunately, I'm so sorry that we didn't have time for any questions, but if you do have questions, please email them to hmis@allchicago.org. You can also feel free to email me. Email me here as well, but I would really recommend that you email the help desk because our entire team will be able to review that. So if there are any further questions that you have, please make sure to email us. Again, my apologies for not having enough time to be able to answer your questions, but I hope that this was helpful to you all. Let us know your thoughts. Shoot us an email if you liked it. Shoot us an email if you thought we should have concentrated on something else. I really always appreciate feedback. So thank you all very much, and I think that will be the end of our webinar. thanks all. And again, if you want to find this pre-recorded webinar, it will be under the Service Point data entry section on the help desk. It'll be linked right here. And so you'll be able to show that to any staff that you think it may be pertinent to. As always, thank you very much and have a wonderful summer.